Welcome to this edition of Peak Performers Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performers Podcast. I'm your host, Thor Conklin, and today we have Stephen Blue. He's in the business of transforming failing and fading companies into global powerhouses. With 40 years of leadership experience, Steve is a proponent of change thinking, changing the culture, changing the product lines, and establishing companies to help them survive and thrive in the new economy. The advent of high-tech products, services, and processes have brought a major shift in communication in how we conduct commerce nowadays. Steve's focus is helping companies and organizations adapt to change in the new economy. It's a metamorphosis. As a matter of fact, you wrote a book on this very topic, have you not?
I did. My fifth book was Metamorphosis from Rust Belt to High Tech in the 21st Century World.
I love it. So give us a little insight into the book, and why did you write it?
Well, in my own company, I was facing an impending or looming crisis, if you will. We still do. We had great products. They're a pretty good margin, but they're all low technology kind of product sets. And we were under attack by expiring patents and by offshore competition, and sort of sounds like any other industrial manufacturing company in the world. Only I wasn't, content to just sort of let that happen. Because if you follow that out over a number of years, 10 or 15 years, you know where that goes.
Yeah.
The only people who don't are what I call fat, dumb, and happy CEOs that just sort of like to live in happy land. So I could see that was going to happen, and I knew the only way out, if you will, was to completely transform the product set in the company from low technology, basically metal fabrication and a little on the higher side of refined plastics, but still plastics and metal technology. So I decided to morph it into high technology, high tech electronic systems, and that was my metamorphosis.
So let's give us some specifics around that. So you started implementing into the actual product, similar to like what we're doing now with smart thermostats, instead of just being a thermostat that sits on the wall?
That's a really good question.
Okay.
No, I didn't. One way, I could have put intelligence in some of my products. Even though a lot of them are plastic products, you can embed intelligence into a plastic product. And that would give you something that you might not have ordinarily, but in my case, it wouldn't extend the patents. And my customers wouldn't pay any extra for that. So the competition was about to, or eventually will knock off those products. They'd have a leg up on me because they didn't have that extra expense. So I decided to invent a whole new product set. And so we took it's all hard parts, but one of the hardest parts was to take a look at the marketplace and figure out what is it that you could do in that marketplace that isn't already done, that you could win at, and that you could devise the intelligence and electronic and engineering to be able to implement it. That's a very tough thing to do in any industrial industry. I happen to be in the railroad industry, and if you look at a locomotive, they're very high tech, and the people who own all the intelligence in a locomotive are the big locomotive builders, General Electric and a company called Caterpillar. And then everything underneath, so they got all that up there, all the high margin, complicated electronic thing, so you can't touch that. And then everything below it is products like I have, which are, dumb metal and plastic, wheels, axles. Now, who's going to get into that? And so we looked beyond where our product set was in the locomotive industry. We looked at other parts of our industry to find out what problems needed to be solved and could we solve them. And that's how we came upon a whole new safety suite of products that basically protect roadway workers from getting killed by trains when they're out there working on the track.
I love that what you said, find out where the problem is, find out where the pain is in the marketplace, and then find a product to actually fit that. Did you go to your suppliers? Did you go to your customers? How did you find out the pain in the marketplace?
Well, I did all of that. I went to the suppliers. I went to my customers. It's yourself, Thor. people like I never knew I needed an iPhone until I saw one. So
Right.
customers don't necessarily know what the heck they want, and a lot of times if you rely on what they think their pain points are, you never find them. Give a perfect example: when a roadway worker gets killed on the track, that is a solution. That is a problem looking for a solution, because those guys shouldn't be getting killed out there.
Right.
But as a matter of fact, most customers weren't looking for a solution to that, an electronic solution. What they did is they put in extra procedures and extra flag people and extra personnel and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying they weren't trying to solve the problem, but they weren't thinking about solving it with what's called an electronic overlay. So we had to sort of look out, well, where is the pain? How are they solving it? Okay, they aren't solving it that way, so how else could it be solved? And that's how we tumbled to an electronic system.
You know what I find a lot of times with my clients is, we're always trying to get to the problem, the root cause. And so often as CEOs, we focus and stop at the cause, not the effect, or I'm sorry, the symptom, not the real problem.
Right.
What do you do as a CEO to get to the root problem? Because if we just keep solving symptoms, it's kind of like medicine, right? If we keep solving the symptom, you can make good money doing that, but you never resolve the problem. And in business, we want to resolve the problem.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can say, Thor, is I look for the third or fourth best answer. I don't stop at the first answer, or I don't necessarily stop at the second answer, and I just keep peeling the onion back, keeping asking why? Why does it have to be this? Why is it that? You have to have a very inquisitive mind. And the problem with a lot of CEOs, especially if they've been in the saddle for 20 or 30 years, is they stop having an inquisitive mind, and they start accepting the solutions that are right there in front of them. And we just sort of dig in very deep. And when we develop a product set, of course, the traditional way to develop a product set is to go, okay, here's a problem. All right, now I got a solution here, and then you see if you can go get a patent on it, right? Well, we sort of reverse engineer that process. We see the problem, and then we have this mega spreadsheet where we get everybody that's got any kind of patent that's anywhere near the subset of what we're trying to solve, and then we say, and you have all these patent claims, right? And you go, here's a hole in that patent claim. And this company's patent claim is a hole over here that they didn't want. Why did they do that, or why didn't they do that? And oftentimes, Thor, in patent filings, it comes down to the expertise of either the lawyer or the engineer that's doing it. It's not necessarily the right answer. It's like, what can they come up with? And so then you have this big mega spreadsheet with all kinds of patent applications and all kinds of claims to go, here's a hole there, here's a hole there, here's a hole. Okay, fine. What does that hole mean? Does that mean that there was no use for that hole? Does that mean that they skipped that hole? Does that mean there's no solution for that hole? And about 80% of the time, it reveals things about the need in the marketplace, plus your competitors' weaknesses. And I just love it. I just really get off on seeing one of these spreadsheets. It's like 9,000 tabs.
It's all in the details, isn't it?
It is.
You got to dig and you got to look. Yeah. Now, are you manufacturing in the United States?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do you compete?
Well, I have as you probably saw in my book, I have a killer culture. And I know some CEOs like to say, oh, talk to me about culture. That's the free beer and pizza for lunch, squishy crowd and all that. And to that I say, well, think Wells Fargo. And they had a killer culture too, but unfortunately almost killed the company. I do have a killer culture, which, and in fact, in my book, I lay it out in the first, 5 or 6 chapters about the foundation to do any of the things that I teach people. Is you got to have a killer culture, and that is our secret weapon. It really is, because we can do things that other companies can't do. Our employees care more about what they're doing than the average employee does. Our employees care about each other more than the average employee does. I'll give you an example. We have a culture, and some people like to debate this with me. We have a culture that says job number one, the most important thing to do, and the only thing that's of importance is to, quote unquote, make a profit. And we measure every single employee, from the factory worker to the engineer to the CEO, on did we make our profited budget number for the year. And one time, a number of years ago, we were in danger of not making the number. It was December, we're on a calendar year, and it was iffy. I'm walking through the factory, and one of my factory workers came up to me and said, I'm really worried about the number, Steve. It looks like we're not going to make it. Is there anything else I can do that I'm not doing now to help us make the profit number. Imagine that, a factory worker who cares about making profit. And that is the number one secret sauce that I have, is I have a culture that turns on a dime, that cares about what they're doing, and only chases profit, not all this other nonsense most companies chase.
You won't hear any argument from me.
You believe
my website? We're profitability consultants. I don't care. That's it. Look, if we don't make a profit, we don't have wages. We don't have wages. We don't have a company. We can't make a product. We can't produce services. We've got to have profit.
Yep.
Have an organization that survives and thrives.
Absolutely right. I did get an argument from a podcaster a couple of weeks ago. He said, well, I would take issue with that. I said, well, how is that? Well, what about Amazon? I said, you can't use Amazon as an example. They took all their profits that they could have had and they plowed it into growth. And I'm not saying that's wrong.
Yeah.
Then he started giving me corporate speak. He was, well, but how can you cascade that down through all the levels? And why will people care? I said, you got to stop this corporate speak with me, man. I can't take that.
Yeah. And look, if you want to save the world and feed the children, great. Take it from your profits.
That's right. Exactly. Right.
You need profits in order to do stuff.
That's the truth.
No.
Well, thank you for not debating that with me.
Look, I'll debate anything if I have a position on it. And my position is similar to yours. Look, you've got to make a profit as an organization in order to take care of the organization and every stakeholder in the process, including clients.
And a lot of times companies, I would say most companies, have so many conflicting goals. It's no wonder they can't function, because quality guy, I'm going to be a little bit facetious here, but not much. Quality guy gets paid to make sure nothing ever gets out the back door, because that way he can be sure that there'll never be a defect and he'll get his bonus. Manufacturing guy, on the other hand, gets paid to shove everything he can out the back door, whether it's got a defect or not, so he can get his bonus. And people working at cross purposes like that, it's no wonder they're dysfunctional. Yeah,
years ago when I came down to Georgia from New York, I was responsible for the global operation of a pulp and paper company from a risk management. I know safety is obviously a big piece of your business. Yeah. And safety is about profitability as well. Look, every time there was something that went wrong in a paper mill, people can die.
Yep.
And if you can keep a safe environment, that all works towards profitability.
Absolutely right.
Are up, the workers are healthy.
Absolutely right.
It all filters in. Railroad business. I'm shocked. So I bought a manufacturing company 10, 12 years ago. Manufactured in Asia, imported the stuff in, sold it. Did actually furniture manufacturing here in the United States. Couldn't figure out how to make a profit. I should have read your book or called you up before I bought the company. But it amazes me that we're not using a rail system more than I think, at least perceived as we could be. I would bring stuff in from China, most of the time from rail, but sometimes we'd actually truck it across as well because it was cheaper to truck it than to do rail. Where do you see the industry going?
Well, the rail industry in the United States has a couple of major problems. One of them is it was regulated for many, 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 many years, and it was deregulated, I think, in the 70s. And the genetic code is still being regulated and having a bureaucracy, and you can't change the rules, you can't be flexible, you can't be lean, you can't do any of that, and there is a genetic code that outlives decades and decades and decades. I think that's probably their biggest problem. Second problem is, believe it or not, unbelievably, when I first got into this industry, the rail industry, about 30 years ago, I was astounded to know that they don't know where their trains are.
They don't know where their trains are?
No. More specifically, they don't know. Okay, they know where a locomotive, particularly locomotive, is, but they don't know what's behind it, and they don't know when it's going to be delivered. You got your box car full of whatever, grain or coal, whatever, and you want to know when you're going to get it. And the answer you'll usually get is, well, between the 7th and the 8th of the month, or the 9th of the month. And now we're sitting on the 1st.
That's true.
Now, and again, I'm not blaming the rail industry. I mean, I have a lot of friends there, and I have a lot of customers there. It's hard for them to earn their cost of capital because the cost of capital is so darn high. I mean, you got track that you have to lay, which is hugely expensive. You got, if you try to buy a rail car, that's, a $30,000 bill. Locomotives are $2 million a crack. And so the other problem is, and the reason the truckers usually pull ahead. Truckers have about, I think, maybe 60% of the rail traffic in the country, and the railroads have about 40. The reason it never gets any better than that is, one, because usually the truckers can be a little more cost competitive, but secondly, because the truckers can tell you when they're going to deliver, because they got a GPS on top of the truck, and it tells them exactly when it's going to be there. And that's very hard for the railroads to overcome. Also, and the last thing I would say about it is they're always under the threat of re-regulation. They're under the threat of re-regulation now. They're arguing with Congress about, we don't want to be re-regulated. What do you get out of that? And so they always have that harbinger hanging over them that if we do anything different that's wrong, we're going to get re-regulated.
Interesting. Do you think we'll get to the point where we have high-speed trains similar to what we're seeing in Asia?
No. In fact, if you look at, say, take the European trains, if they're supposed to leave at 12:01, they'll leave at 12:01. If they're supposed to arrive at 11:52, they will arrive at 11, plus or minus a minute or so. Very, very, very efficient. And the reason, the macro reason that is, Thor, is back in the 50s, roughly 50s, the United States decided to invest in the interstate. The government decided to invest in the interstate highway system and not the rail system. Yeah. Europeans did exactly the opposite. They invested in passenger rail, and that's why the roads are, in a sense, crappy compared to ours. And that's where all the money went in the beginning. And so when you look at the only really, say, inner city passenger rail, it's Amtrak, and it's a racket. It's regulated by the government. It's subsidized by the government. And what better formula for failure than to be regulated by the government and subsidized by the government than Amtrak? But to get to your question a little more specifically, in order for them to have high-speed rail, you got to lay a lot of track. You got to buy a lot of land. And you can't see Amtrak shares, except for the Northeast Corridor, they share all their track with the freight railroads. Oh. And freight railroads, the track that they have, coal don't care how smooth the ride is. And high-speed rail at 90 or 120 miles an hour could never, unless they built. And where would they get the money? They can barely earn their cost of capital now, and unless the government were to subsidize it in a big way, I would be surprised if that ever happens.
I used to live in the Northeast, so I took the train into New York City every day. It worked well on the Northeast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was trying to get into Manhattan driving every day. It's a nightmare.
Well, you don't want to.
No. Now, I'm sure at some point we're going to start to see electric trains.
Well,
we're already seeing it stuff, but and are we going to see it on the? I can't think of the word now. The non-commuter, the cargo.
The freight railroad? No, they're half electric now. They're what happens is they have a diesel generator that generates electricity in the sort of top part of the locomotive, and then that gets converted to mechanical engine energy in the bottom part of the locomotive. And the traction, they're carrying like 100 cars behind them with 100 tons in each car. The traction involved in that is, the physics are way, way, way beyond anything that you could do with an electric train. So I don't think you're ever going to see that.
Got it. Tell me, when you're talking to a group of CEOs and they have manufacturing operations here in the United States, what are some of the things, the key points that you're hitting with them in order to to move into this new economy? What are some of the trends that you're seeing? What are some of the sticking points that you're seeing? And what are your top go-to, this is kind of your hit list?
Yeah. I hate to say it, but I'll come back to that. Culture is my number one, always my number one. And I've proven time and time again over the course of 40 years that if you have a killer culture, and what I tell CEOs all the time is the culture you want is the Cirque du Soleil culture. I assume you've seen a Cirque du Soleil performance?
Yep.
What do? I mean, they come to work every day all jazzed up to do better today than they did yesterday. And why wouldn't you want a culture like that? And the pushback, of course, they get is, but we're not performers around here. We're, bending metal and, doing this. And besides that, Cirque du Soleil people love to come to work and our people hate to come to work. And this is pretty much what they say. And I say, well, whose fault is it if your people hate to come to work? It's yours, Mr. CEO. So I always start with the culture, because when you have a killer culture, Thor, the business runs on overdrive and an automatic pilot. You don't have to do a thing. I make strategic decisions, right? That's my job. I make all the big expensive decisions, and I'm the guy that can make the call for the big, expensive risks. Other than that, I don't dabble down into the guts of the organization and try to, orchestrate everything. In fact, my leaders don't. I'll give you a perfect example. We have a very creative culture. And it started years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when we trained all of our employees on the principles of creativity and brainstorming. And people thought I was crazy because at the time I brought in the guy who used to be the chief creativity officer for the QVC network to do that. And people went, "Are you crazy? QVC is a shopping network. Why would you bring a guy in like that to teach people how to manage? You don't understand. I'm trying to get the broad principles of creativity, and I don't care what industry you're in. It applies everywhere." And in the beginning, so we trained them all, and then for the better part of the year, my guy rode shotgun with them, and he'd meet with my employees 2 or 3 times a week, and we'd say, "Here's the problem we want you to work on. Here's the tools and resources you'll need to work on that, and here's the time and place we want you to work on it at." And now you fast forward to today, and our employees, all of them, decide what problems or opportunities they're going to work on. They decide they marshal the resources that they need to work on them with. They decide where they're going to be to do that and what time they're going to be to do that. And there is not one boss tells them what to do. And that's what I call a culture that works on automatic.
Through the entire organization?
The entire organization. That's a good question, because when I brought the QVC guy in, I trained everybody from the office to the factory floor on the principles of creativity. And in fact, I created what I call a Google-like campus in the factory. If you walk to the back of my factory and walk into what we call the creation station, it's like an oasis of technology and creativity. I mean, it's whiteboards all over the place, chairs for people to relax in, a pool table. And we started that creation station about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. But I put it in the middle of the factory, Thor, for a reason. Because if you make creativity and new product development only the engineering department's job, nobody else is going to work on it. And so I did that intentionally to make sure every single person in the employee was engaged in the process.
That's fascinating. Now, we have an extremely tight labor market right now. Finding the right people to get into your organization and to fit into that culture is extremely important. Not everyone's going to fit in. How do you find the right people, and how do you remove the incorrect people?
Yeah. The most important part is to remove the incorrect people, because I don't care how good your procedures are, your hiring policy, you're going to hire bad people. It just happens.
Yeah.
Good at interviewing and all that kind of stuff. So that's the most important. We don't hesitate. When someone isn't fitting in with the culture, we know that pretty quick. On the upfront, when we interview them, we do peer interviewing. So if you're going to work in the factory in a particular work cell, all of the people you work with are going to be part of the interview, and they have a major to say as to whether you get hired or not. And by the same token, Thor, what happens is we have a lot of people, when it's time to fire somebody, it's usually the work group that they work with that come, and they do peer reviews too. It's usually the work group that comes to one of the leaders and says, "This guy's got to go. He's just not fitting in here." And so we do a lot of, of course we have psychological evaluations, but I would say mostly it's the peer interviewing that avoids most mistakes. And what I always say is hire slow, but fire fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that I see so often is during the onboarding process is really not making it very clear to the new hire, this is what's expected, when it's expected, and how it's expected. Yes, we should be creative, but this is our bar, this is our standard, and this is what we expect from you.
Yep.
And then if that's done, which a lot of times it's not done, that person's just left there to just kind of figure it out.
Yep.
And, training stops after they get their login password.
That's true.
And I have no idea why people won't, or organizations and leaders won't continue to invest in the people that they've decided to hire.
That astounds me. And to your point, what happens when they park you in a place, say, "Here's your password," and figure it out, is you sit there, and number one, you're scared. You don't know if you're going to fit in or not. So you're very, very anxious. You don't want to make a mistake. So the best way most people decide how not to make mistakes is by not doing anything. So they don't do anything. And then what they do is they sort of look around and they mimic, or they pattern themselves after what they see. And if you're not controlling what they see, you don't know what kind of mimicking they're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how did you become such a great CEO?
That's 40 years of experience with a lot of mistakes and a lot of learning from mistakes and a lot of learning, moving around. I'll tell you one thing I tell young people all the time. In fact, I'm on the faculty at Winona State University. I'm what's called the CEO in residence. And so I speak to a lot of young kids all the time, and I tell them, when they ask me that question, I say, here's what you do. Here's what I did. When I first went to work and I've worked for Fortune 500 companies, little mom and pop shops. I've bought companies. I've started up companies, everything in between. In the beginning, when I was working for a Fortune 500 company, I'd look around and I'd see, there's something not right. That's not working right over here, and I might be able to figure out how to make it work. And these tended to be the really crappy assignments. I'll give you an example. I love this example, and it's true. One time, I saw the company cafeteria, and this is a big company. We had thousands of people, so they had cafeterias all over. It was horrible. I mean, the food was bad, the service was worse, and I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, you talk about the third rail in politics. Don't try to touch a company cafeteria. There's no upside to that, Thor, none whatsoever. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to see if I can fix it. Nobody wanted to touch it. I did. I fixed it. And then I went on to something a little more substantive to fix. And then the big guys started asking for me, hey, send Blue in there, see if you can fix it. In about 3 years, I was in every organization, in every department, top to bottom, sales to engineering, and I knew everything about, most importantly, what went wrong in all these organizations, and of course, how to make it right. And that was the foundation for my unique ability to take on problems and fix them. And I tell people all the time, take the crummiest assignment you can find, go to the worst place in the world that they want somebody, and take the big chances. That's how you build a career. And I would say that's how I got most of it.
Yeah, I love that. When I purchased the manufacturing company, first thing I wanted to do is get on the floor and figure out, how we did these things. I had no idea. And they were shocked, that the owner of a company was going to, get in there, roll up their hands. I remember on 4th of July doing an install for a client, laying on the floor, on 4th of July on my back underneath this equipment, connecting some plumbing and some electrical. And
good for you.
But it's like, look, it had to get done.
Yeah.
And here's the thing too. You go out and you start doing some of those things, you learn very quickly that some of the processes that you have aren't very good.
Yeah,
it's like, how are we getting this box off the truck? It was like, we just kind of lug it and hope that, it doesn't fall on anybody.
Take it on the way.
Exactly. It's like, this stuff's I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4". It's like, this is not a good way to go about it.
It's so true.
Well, I love that, getting in there and figuring out what those problems. And what I like about it too is that you started at the bottom. You didn't try to figure out, okay, how do we take our profitability from 8% to 9%? Let's figure out how we get the cafeteria right. Well, maybe if then people show up and are a little bit happier with what we're providing from there, we might have a better workforce.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it takes hard work. It seems a lot of leaders today want that quick fix. It's like, how do we go from A to Z in one, jump? Yep. And a lot of it is just getting in there, rolling up your sleeves, and doing the hard work.
Well, I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those anal retentive, get it done now, ADHD CEOs. I've got to get this fixed right now. But I've learned over the years there are no quick fixes. Oh, sure, I can make a command decision to go, why are you doing that? Stop doing that. Here's $500,000. Do something different.
Yep.
But I've learned over the years that especially CEOs, they have to temper what you just correctly pointed out, their natural tendency to, because what happens is they end up doing it again. And then again, because they didn't do it right the first time. And then the workforce gets demoralized. They start looking at the top and they start thinking, rightfully so, these guys really know what the hell they're doing up there?
Yeah. You've got to have faith in that leadership. I'm sure you've had some mentors along the way. What are some of the lessons that stick out for you?
Well, probably the most significant mentor I ever had was Anthony Robbins. And, when you get this, he takes massive action. That's his hallmark, right? Now, when I have a problem that I want to solve, or I have an opportunity I want to go after, I send 15 ballistic missiles that way, a couple of submarines, and the whole army. I don't mess around to see what's going to happen on the first wave. I just give it everything I got. And if there's anything that's made me successful, it's because I don't do anything halfway, and I give everything I've got. And I would have to say I learned that 40 years ago from Tony Robbins. And I would say another mentor I've had that's been very, very significant in my life has been, I'm sure you're familiar with Jay Abraham.
Yeah.
I bought everything that guy ever sold. Everything that guy sold. Oh, absolutely. And I actually was a co-producer of a movie on his life and his legacy here. I know him personally. I've been at his home, but I didn't 40 years ago. And when I first met him, I said, Jay, do you remember this big, thick, I think it was a red bound book. It was about, maybe 2 or 3 inches thick. 40 years ago, I said that you were selling for $2,000. That's a lot of money in any year, but it was a lot of money in 40 years ago when I wasn't making much. And he said, yeah. He said, I remember that. I said, I bought that. He said, really? He said, did you use any of it? I said, Jay, I used all of it. And he's in a sense like Tony Robbins, but he just creatively goes after all, his mind is just way, way, way out there. And you know what? Most people don't know about Jay. He's a really nice guy too.
I've heard him speak many times.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I'm a senior leader for Tony.
So, are you?
Yeah, so I spent the last 15 years teaching with him.
Really?
I'm leaving in 2 days, actually, to head to Florida to work with him for the next 6 days.
You do? Is that UPW or something?
Date with Destiny.
Date with Destiny. Yep. I've done that too.
The 6-day program. So
I've done the Firewalk 5 times. I've done with Date with Destiny. I bought everything he ever wrote and then some.
He's quite an individual, and behind and off stage, he's the same guy that you see on stage. So
really,
Steve, this has been absolutely amazing. I did not expect that to be the answer, but those are 2 brilliant individuals, and I really appreciate you being on the show today. Tell the audience how they can get in touch with you.
Well, I think the easiest way to spell it, if I try to spell Miller Ingenuity, that's just a little hard. If you go StephenLBlue.com, StephenLBlue.com, you'll get links to my company. You'll get links to my books, my speeches, and like anything you wanted to know, and maybe a few things you didn't even want to know.
Great time today. I really appreciate you taking your time to spend it with us.
My pleasure, Thor. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you.
Take care.